And welcome back. And we're getting ready to move into a very important conversation at this time. Recently, there was a ruling in the court that puts into perspective the limitations that pawnshops and money lenders are supposed to abide by. And we actually have the two attorneys who were a part of that case joining us this morning, who've now taken the ruling and moved it into an advocacy role to talk about what we need to know about money lending and how it falls under the Money Lenders Act in Belize. We have with us Steve Pereira and Kevin Arthurs, both attorneys at law. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Belize.
Now, this is a conversation that can really get people going.
Yes.
And I want to just start off by having you explain to us, in the best layman terms you can, the case itself that was brought forward and the ruling. Right?
Okay. Well, I want to start off by saying that for me, and I'm sure Steve shares that view, that this is a landmark decision.
Yeah.
It is a decision, as you have said, which affects both business people and persons who are marginalized. In terms of, funny enough, man, if I could segue a little, that I was doing some research a bit earlier, and in England, there was a study shown, and the results of that study was that moneylenders service a very small and poor constituency. In fact, in England, of the people who were polled, 55% of them, the poor people, were accessing loans from pawnshops and moneylenders, as opposed to 6.5%. So when we're talking about this judgment, we're talking about a very large percentage of people, especially in Belize, where our poverty rate is a bit on the high end, about 40, if I remember. So this is a very important judgment for me and for Steve as well. And it's like in every profession, when you have the opportunity to have a fulfilling result for persons who probably could not have done it themselves, it is always gratifying. And so that sense of gratitude and sense of privilege I want to share this morning. But in terms of the actual judgment, the facts are a very common one, as Steve was saying off air, that this is a story all too familiar to most Belizeans. This story is a bit more sad. A family in Orange Walk had some medical bills. Their father had lost his eye. Wow. And so he went to the pawn shop, and you'll find that the number one reason why people source funds from a pawn shop is for medical expenses. Second is utility bills. Okay. And when they went to the pawn shops, like every other instant, they were told that they had to provide security. They borrowed a total of $3,500. After they went into some financial hardship, they defaulted, and they went back into the institution asking them to please give them an extension. I forgot to say as well that they were told that as security they had to sign over a parcel of land, which was 30 acres of prime farmland. And
which is far, just to be clear, far beyond the value of 3,500.
We have the exact figure, and this is something that peeved the parties in the courtroom, including the judge, that the value of the land was somewhere in the vicinity of $63,000. So you borrow a loan for $3,500, for which you pay back, because they actually paid back. They paid back $1,000, and you lose an asset, which in and of itself is worth $62,000. Plus, another aspect of the story, which is very rarely told in this case, is that the land has a quota of sugarcane. So the family actually depending on it for additional income. So the threat of it being taken away was that it could plunge them further into some financial hardship. In any event, they defaulted on the loan, and when they went back to redeem the land after they had gotten some money, they were told, no, you can't get back the land. We've transferred it into our names. And if you want it back, what you have to do is you now have to give me the full value of the land. And they're like, oh no, I don't think that's right. And so another aspect of the story is that I have to commend the resilience of this family. A lot of people would have given up. These people actually filed a suit in the magistrate's court on their own and tried to challenge this law. They were a bit unsuccessful because they did Mr. Pereira to finish it in the Supreme Court. But they were tenacious. They knew they were right, and they eventually charged it to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, we were able to be successful, and there is some clarity.
Now, the first question I have to ask is looking at the validity of the agreement between the person who seeks the service of a pawn shop or money lender. Now, this isn't a verbal agreement that they make. They do sign on to something, right?
Yeah.
So how, and I think, I say that because many of us who don't understand or know what the laws stipulate feel that if you've signed, you've agreed. There's nothing else you can do. And so if you end up in that situation, you say, well, I signed the papers. So, but there was an agreement signed, right? No, it was purely verbal?
In this particular case, there wasn't an agreement signed. What they had was some tickets, and the tickets simply spoke to the assets being given up as a collateral, and that if the loan was not paid within a certain period of time, that it would remain with the pawn shop themselves. This is exactly why the judgment is so important, because it highlights sections of the Act itself, the Moneylenders Act, that regulate this particular document that should be given. Just as how you said, it's only practical that what they should do when you borrow monies from a pawn shop is to give you a signed agreement stipulating clearly the amount being borrowed, the interest being paid, the collateral being held, and as to the times that you need to make your payments. And it should be signed by both parties. Unfortunately, most of the pawn shops right now are not giving these persons who borrow money these documents. What they do is, even if they sign some particular document, they would simply have the person sign it, give them the money, and keep the document. So we're finding that even a few people coming to us asking us for assistance, most of them, and Kevin can attest to this, most of them would say that we never received that document. We don't have a copy of it. And that's quite unfortunate, because the law stipulates clearly that they're supposed to provide you with that document. There's also a provision in the Act that states that if at any time you lose that document, you can go to that pawn shop and request a copy in writing. And if the pawn shop does not provide you with that document, then interest stops from as of that point of the request. And if they fail to provide you with that document, they cannot enforce the agreement against you. So they can't take you to court to collect on that money that they've loaned until they provide you with this information. And that's why, as Kevin had said, the Act itself is geared at protecting those in need, protecting those persons who borrow these monies, because primarily the persons who borrow from these pawn shops are persons in need. And so this is why the Act is there, and this is why the provisions in that Act are geared at protecting them and providing them with an avenue to get those documents when needed.
Now, if we look at the landscape in Belize and the proliferation of fast loans and money lenders and payday loans, they call them, and the pawn shops that pop up, it's obviously a good business. You don't have that many people jumping on board if there isn't money being made. Now, I asked off air, and I'll ask you again, there is a Money Lenders Act that stipulates exactly what the limits are in terms of interest rates and what should be done in the transaction. Who is the regulator for these money lenders and pawn shops? And what exactly, because it seems, obviously with the case that you've just won, that they're not exactly abiding by the Act itself.
Yeah. Well, it must be a good business. Imagine if the sale
it's
of
every corner now.
Every corner.
Imagine if the sale of drugs was unregulated and legal. Who wouldn't get into it? And so what we have is, and that's one of the things about the judgment. The judgment brings back balance, because it is important for persons who have money lending business to know what the law is, and for people who borrow to know what to expect. To go back to something that Steve said, if I could quickly before I answer that question, is that the Act is so pro the borrower that the fee that you have to pay to get those documents is $2. That's all it takes. And so there are requirements, and our problem is that we're finding that the regulations, which would fall under the Ministry of Finance, aren't there. It's a developing jurisprudence and it's developing market as it relates to the law. This is the first written judgment that there is on it. And I don't know that there is any regulation whatsoever. In England, there are written rules which guide what moneylenders can do and what you expect. In Belize, we don't. And so there's no monitoring body, to my mind, that I know of. I know in the past I'd heard that there were plans to have a consumer protection bureau set up. It has not been done, but it is something which I think we direly need and something which should fall under this act.
Yeah.
You know, following this judgment, as a matter of fact, following the situation that you dealt with there for the folks there in our Rockland family, this actually shed light. It shed some serious light on what Belizeans, especially the poorer community, have been going through in having to get money from the pawn shops. Because like Marlene mentioned, these pawn shops are in every corner of this country. Everywhere you go, you could get some money from a pawn shop. And it's easily accessible. But at the same time, folks didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Following this judgment, what did that do for Belizeans? And following that as well, have we seen a rise of complaints from Belizeans towards the pawn shops?
Can we answer that? All right, well, yes, indeed. As a result of the judgment, we've seen people come forward. They've been asking us a lot of questions. We've been having a lot of meetings, requests by persons who have fell afoul of these by these pawn shops, and persons have also been calling us, and we applaud persons like yourselves, like Open Your Eyes and the news agencies, because it's important to, beyond the judgment, it's important for us to educate the people out there as to what their rights are, especially in regards to this. The fact that these pawn shops have not been regulated as vigorously as they should have been. What we can do in the alternative to that is to have persons educated about their rights. And the more persons are educated about their rights, the more they would be more willing to take these matters to court, which would indirectly start having these pawn shops abide by what they should be abiding by. This is one of the reasons why at every chance that we have, we inform the people, the persons, the clients, the media, that it is clear, beyond clear, in the Act that the most a pawn shop can charge you is 4% per month. That is one of the most important sections there. It's spelled out clearly in the Act, and we find that in most cases, pawn shops are charging 30% a month, 25% a month. It's at some very ridiculous rates, knowing that persons cannot make those payments from the very fact that they're borrowing a small amount.
And if I'm to pull a bit from one of the interviews that you guys provided for the news, and I think it is a very solid point. When you look at why and who accesses a pawn shop or a money lender institution, it will most likely be persons who are in a desperate situation and need money as quickly as possible. In other words, you may not have the time to go through the bank process. You may not have access, perhaps because you're already burdened at the bank. And so you go into a money lender's institution or a pawn shop, really just seeking fast cash. So it is a risk for the money lenders, which is part of what we've learned to understand, risky business, and the type of people who will get involved, and the challenges that can come from it. I say that because you pointed out that if somebody is already in a desperate situation, they already owe family, they already owe the banks, they've already maxed out credit cards, so they come to the money lenders, and then there's an exorbitant interest rate. It's almost doomed from the start.
Correct.
At 30% on a monthly basis, are you saying that a person who goes into a money lender's institution from this point forward can say, no, you can't charge me more than 4%? They have all right to be able to do that?
Worse than that, I would like to see persons go in and ensure that there is the 4% per month, and if that 4% is not given to them, that they make a complaint. It's high time that listen,
But can you recover if I have gone through the cycle and perhaps paid 30%?
yeah.
Yes.
Can I go back and recover
That-
the 26% that I paid more than I should have?
that is exactly what the
this-
judgment says. In fact, that's exactly what the Act says. If it is that you paid more, the court has the ability to even change the interest rate. So if you were charged 4%, to my mind, and the bank and the courts think, you shouldn't have paid 4%, you should have paid 2%. The court has the ability to reopen that transaction, that agreement, and charge you less interest. This legislation, not used, is a weapon of mass destruction in the favor of persons who are vulnerable. This act is so powerful that if you have a written agreement and you don't get it signed and get a copy of it, the agreement is unenforceable. They can't sue you.
Yeah.
And I think that, as Steve was saying in terms of education, I think that as people are educated more, that we will see the pawn shops behaving differently.
Yeah.
Because probably some of the pawn shops don't know. There's a misconception, John, in terms of who we believe access these loans. Because in our heads, we believe that it's probably only persons who are poor. It's the condition that you're in. The Vegas aren't necessarily poor people. They aren't necessarily rich people either. But I was on the court. Give you an example. I was at the court yesterday, and Sergeant of Police came up to me, and she was very happy. And she said, "Mr. Arthurs, I saw you on television, and I have one of those similar situations." And she gave me a situation. She had borrowed $1,000. A police officer, you know. And she was paying only the interest for a year. And what was the interest that she was paying? $250 a month.
What?
And she had paid it for a year. So she had paid $3,000 and had paid only interest.
And only interest.
And at the end of that, they repossessed her car, which was a 2013 Ford Escape. So
Valued somewhere
the
around.
horror stories that are out there, are overwhelming.
Yes.
Overwhelming.
It's scary talk because, it blows my mind to know exactly what's going on, especially with the pawn shops. And from an attorney's point of view, I am in a desperate situation right now, and this is following the judgment. I'm in a desperate situation right now, and I really need this money. The banks are saying no, but I need to go. Walk me through. Can you please, from an attorney's standpoint, because people are looking at this, because besides the inquiry situation that's going on, this is actually the hot commodity right now that people are actually focusing on.
Because so many people access it.
So many people, and it happens every day. But following the judgment, and from an attorney's point of view, walk me through going to the pawn shop, asking for a loan. What am I supposed to do? And is there anything I'm supposed to see on the wall so I can read, so I know exactly what I'm getting myself into? Please do that for us.
Exactly. It's good that you point to that. Actually, there is a section in the Act that actually states that every pawn shop in their place of business should have clearly depicted on their walls the total interest rate per annum. So by right, the most that they should be posting on inside their business would be the 48% per annum. And that should be depicted so that persons can see that is the interest rate. That should be depicted also because the persons who should be regulating should also be aware that they are complying. So when a person goes to a pawn shop and you're going there and you're going to borrow, you would go in, you'd verify, hopefully they should have the signs as stipulated in the Act that states their maximum annual interest rate, and you then ask them about their loan provisions, how you can apply, and check with them as to whether or not they're complying with the laws, whether or not they are charging 4% a month. If that particular pawn shop is not complying with the law, then you shop around, because there may be pawn shops that are complying, that are lending at the 4%. Now, if one is cheating the system and doing these illegal loans at 25% or 30%, then stay away from that pawn shop and focus on for want of a better word, the good pawn shops, the one that are providing or abiding by the Money Lenders Act.
We don't want to say a generalized statement that all are abandoning what is stipulated in the Act. I'm sure there are some that are abiding by what the law says.
And remember, these, even if you abide by the law, these pawn shops are still profitable. Because if you think about it, 48% interest rate for the year is very high.
Yeah.
Interest rates at the bank aren't as high as that when you borrow on a commercial basis or for personal matters. They're 8%, 9%, 11% a year. So 48% does not put them in a bad position. They still are in a ability to make that profit. So shopping around for the proper pawn shop and the ones complying with the act at the 4% would be what we would suggest to the persons. And the more this happens, I believe some of those pawn shops who may be in the wrong might start complying with the law and reducing their interest rates.
But what this judgment does is not only highlight the limits for the interest rates, and you guys have been speaking about that I think it's so important, but even more so, it's what can be done if you default. And I think this particular case with the property is one that is a great wake-up call to people, because you feel, if I default on my loan, my agreement, then okay, then that means you take what I have used as collateral. But what the ruling has pointed out is that the moneylenders cannot do so. They could not and should not have transferred the property into their name, and they can't take back the assets.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So how does a person, what is the most important information that a person who wants to do business at a money lender institution, what do they need to know? If I take a piece of jewelry that is worth a lot more than what I'm borrowing for, personally, and I go in and I can't make the payments, what am I supposed to do?
Well, there are a couple of things. The first is that you have to know what you owe, and you have a right to know what you owe. And so the first thing I would say, if you default, is you should request an accounting. And under Section 16, you are entitled to get it. So you'll know exactly Marlene owes $50, and her interest up to January 2017 is $5,000. The second thing you should know is that you have the absolute and immediate right to seek redress from a court. And so when you look at the interest rate that you're being charged, the law stops the moneylender from charging compound interest. The law is so strict that you cannot call it any other name, like a penalty, and it has the same effect as a compound interest. Interestingly enough, the law is even more severe in trying to protect these vulnerable people from unscrupulous lenders, and they are good ones. In that the law, there's a case which we argued as precedent, that even the principal, so if you as a money lender lend $10,000 and you fail to abide by the regulations of the Money Lenders Act, you can't even collect your $10,000. So the security has to be returned, and the $10,000 that you lent out is gone. There's a school of thought that does not agree with that, but we are saying that this act, the way our legislation is framed, is that way, and it has to be this way for two reasons. One, Belize is a young economy. This is a young process that we're going through in terms of regulation. And so the balance of power has to switch back right now to allow us to know exactly what to do, and to put the people who have the most power to have a check and balance on them. So this act, I think, has been observed in its breach, and when we start to follow what's in the act, we're going to see a lot more productive things happening.
Now, hearing your explanations, how do you balance the system, or how do you explain the balance of the system? If a money lender can't retrieve the value of what they have lent because someone defaults, what's stipulated in the act for the money lenders? And I'm not advocating for unscrupulous business persons, but ultimately you also don't want to give the impression to borrowers that, well, I can not pay back and you still can't take my property.
I'm going to get this one. I advocate for money lenders as much as I advocate for borrowers. This is a case where you don't have to choose between the two.
Okay.
When somebody goes into the hospital to get surgery, they're sick, they can't help themselves. It is unfair, and it would not be expected that you would put the onus on the patient to do certain things. It is very similar to that. And so for the way that the act is set up, it's set up to allow the balance for the person who has the most power. And so I think it should remain that way. You know? Steve wanted to say something.
No, I guess what you were looking at, where you were going with it, is what can be done with the actual asset that they have, the collateral that they hold. Well, just similarly to what the banks do, if you borrow $1,000 and you put up your car that's worth $20,000 as a collateral, what the moneylenders have the ability to do is to sell that vehicle that you've put up as a collateral. But if the value of that vehicle is $20,000, when it sells, the moneylender has a duty and a responsibility to return $19,000 to that borrower, and then to keep his $1,000 that is owed to him. Similarly to what is done at a bank. If you default on your house payment, mortgage, the bank sells the property, pays its debt, and gives you the balance. And that's the similar situation that should occur when it comes to the money lenders. Unfortunately, what is being done right now is the money lenders keep that car and keeps that $19,000 to an extent. And that is a clear sign of
So in addition to the exorbitant interest, they also get all the additional value from the asset.
Which is wrong.
It is absolutely wrong. Now, we know how many people access these institutions. We know how many people access these pawn shops. We know how many people are defaulting. And I think this is why it's become a conversation that a lot of people are having. It's why people are seeking you guys out with their own personal stories to find out what can be done. I think looking at, and I wanted to touch on what you've spoken about in terms of research done in the UK, we are putting people in a worse financial situation by allowing the money lenders and the pawn shops to run unregulated. Talk a bit about what has been done in other countries to ensure that if you're in a bind, you can access cash, but you won't be taken advantage of.
Yeah. Well, as you rightly said, that there has to be balance, and that's the word I want to leave this set with, that there has to be balance between both the lender and the borrower. In the UK, what they have done is that they've passed an act called the Consumer Credit Act, and that brings balance. In that system, the money lender, they're very strict, but in that system, what happens is that when you default, you have to be given a notice first. After you've been given that notice, you have the opportunity to come in and to see if you can catch up with your payments. The second thing that they have, which I think is something that we should borrow, is that they have a financial ombudsman. We are just in the process of getting our first ombudsman, but in the UK, there's a person who specifically deals with complaints against money lenders. Before I go there, there's another thing the point I wanted to make. I was speaking to my dad, and he was saying, that credit and debt are a part of Belizean life, of society on a whole. So there's nothing wrong. Steve was talking about interest rates. At a credit card interest rate is 24%. And as you were saying, that there are risks involved. Everything in Belize works, or in the world works on credit. A simple thing like your rent is credit, because you do pay at the end of the month. Your light bill and your water bill is credit. So the question is not attacking business. No, absolutely not. We don't want that. But what we want is, we want fairness. We want the law to be followed. This is a very old act. This act has been around since 1958, and it's modeled off a UK act that is from 1900. So there have always been unscrupulous lenders, and they've always been desperate borrowers. The Shakespearean play of Merchant of Venice is the perfect example of a situation where the law speaks. It would be beside me not to as well commend the counsel for the other side. And a question that we get very regularly is, Mr. Arthur, Mr. Pereira, do you think that the judgment will be appealed? And my response to it is always that I doubt it. If there is, I think it's a good thing. But if there's an appeal, it's going to be in a very narrow area. Because what the judge did was a very measured judgment. was to simply restate the law. This case, if you look at the other side, was well argued. I'm not just saying it because we are here, but on the other side was a senior counsel who did a tremendous job in allowing the issues to be aired. So this is, to my mind, a solid judgment, and most importantly, a very timely one. It's a time when internationally we're looking at a downturn in economic times. And during those times, people will try to access more funds. And so this is a time when I'm hoping that after we leave, that you'll get in the regulators, that you'll have the regulators coming up with structures, mechanisms, and bodies that will monitor these institutions. I'm hoping that they'll have YouTube, they'll take onto social media and encourage and educate persons. I'm hoping that they'll set up the departments and agencies to review and monitor these things. I'm hoping that people flood the courts with lawsuits, hoping that the good pawn shop lenders and the Chamber of Commerce come on board and say, we will not tolerate people being usurious. We will not tolerate businesses taking advantage of people. Because we live in a good country.
Yes, we do.
Now, you spoke about the influx of persons who have called in with complaints. And I recall, I believe it was you, Steve, who said that the stories you're getting now are even more outrageous than the case that you received the ruling on. You know, I'll tell you a little bit of a backstory. The total value of her interest was 240%.
Yeah.
I almost thought that was an error in reading it because it was so outrageous. And I was in disbelief. And because we don't think per annum, maybe, I don't know why, but I was so caught off guard by that. And I think it really goes to the heart of the matter, which is that you, when you are in need, you will do whatever it takes. You know, and if it's for a loved one, sometimes we say we'll sell our soul for our loved ones. So in looking at the cases that are coming forward, what seems to be the typical trend? Is it more the confiscation of assets, or is it the exorbitant interest rates?
Both. Because they go hand in hand. The pawn shops that are operating with the illegal contracts, they use the exorbitant interest rates in an effort to get the asset. Their entire goal, in most cases, is to get the asset. Interestingly enough, I've had one pawn shop call me and ask me to help enforce an agreement. And when I explained to them that really you are to go after the interest rate, they said that's not what their concern is. They want the asset and they want us to find a way to get the asset. And I explained to them that's simply illegal and that cannot be done. So that's, I mean, the major problem is, it goes hand in hand. It's both the interest rate, the exorbitant interest rate. That's the reason why the law says you have to state the yearly interest rate inside the business. So people would have recognized in
so
this.
We see 48%.
At least if they see 48%, in this case they would have gone in and see 240% interest, and they would have probably reconsidered. The good thing also is that persons who have been wronged have an ability to make these claims if they have been wronged within the past 6 years, and that is very important because persons might feel that they have they don't have the ability to seek redress now that time has passed. But fortunately for them, they have that 6-year ability for redress.
So, but we know exactly what the pawn shops are after. Like we mentioned, they're after the
asset.
After the asset. You did mention though, and this one stuck within my mind, that following the pawn shop receiving that asset or getting that asset, the pawn shop has been owed or is owed about $2,000. This asset, in the case of this 2013 Ford Escape, which is worth a lot of money.
That one gets to you there, John.
Yeah, of course it does. And, it does because a lot of people, people have been wronged and people need their money. So if the pawn shop is owed only $2,000, got the Ford Escape 2013, worthing somewhere around $48,000, sold this vehicle out for $48,000, that pawn shop is supposed to give that person back the money, owed, the excess monies. $48,000, you take away $2,000, that person should get $46,000.
Correct.
So that's in the judgment, that's in the law.
Yes.
Wow. So people are supposed to take heed of this.
But John,
If it's been within the past
If
6
it's
years.
okay within the
John-
past, okay.
John, there's a cultural undercurrent. Belizean people, we take things for face value. We're very trusting people. And so if something happens, we tend to feel that's what happens. And that's what the case of the police officer. In another case, and this is something which got to me, there was another gentleman who came by to see me, and he was saying that he had borrowed some money to go to the United States, about $2,000. And he was supposed to pay weekly to a certain pawn shop. And he left for the States and he defaulted 1 week. As security, he had a convertible that he left. After he had left to gone to the States, his significant other called him and told him that the police are there. Now his vehicle was locked in his garage using a uniformed police officer. They broke into the garage, took the car without the keys, and sold it. That is scandalous.
So clearly, the police
The police are
department
complicit.
are not aware of what the law is saying.
Yes.
Correct.
A police
Because
officer,
they're enforcing it based on what
Illegally.
the money lenders are saying, but illegally.
illegally. So
Wow.
the thing, what compounds that was also, along with the police officer, was somebody who works at the court.
How is that possible?
This is a culture, and when the person told me that, I dropped my pen, I stopped taking notes, and I looked at him, and I thought, this is preposterous. You must be kidding. And he says, no, I have surveillance. I can show you. They came in, they broke down the door on the strength of the fact that he had already transferred the vehicle as security. But you still cannot do that. It's trespassing and damage to property. There's a process. We in Belize have a tendency to sit back and believe that things are the way they are because they're supposed to be that way. Absolutely not.
Well, and not only that, a scenario like that will only compound the problem because you tell the story that a police officer, which is our official enforcers of the law,
yes.
went to retrieve your property. You believe this is a legitimate process.
See, but you see,
I mean, in terms of cultural thoughts and the way things function. But
Marlene-
that is unbelievable. But
Marlene, it's a case of peacocking because if you are wronged, who do you go to? The courts?
The police.
Somebody from the courts was there
Yeah.
present? Or the police and somebody from the police department was present. So who do you go to?
or would you even question it because you have these two
Because,
officials
Correct.
there,
Correct.
and you share that story with another person, and then it happens to them, so they believe it's legitimate.
Correct.
That is unbelievable, and thankfully, with the ruling and with this education process that you guys are in now, people will be able to understand what can be done, and I think that is the fundamental issue.
You know, there's a commission of inquiry going on in relation to, as you were referring to earlier, in terms of immigration. This is such a bread and butter issue that I think a commission of inquiry should be had in relation to this.
Yes.
In other developed jurisdictions, that is what would happen. There would be inquiries. And so I'm hoping that at some point in time, that this is taken up as a primary issue. Because it affects, the last judgment, I was looking at it, and the last judgment that had such an impact, and this is to me the most financial impact to persons who are vulnerable, but the last one was the issue of persons who are unceremoniously taken all together and put in jail. These are things that we as a country, as a developing country, our margin of error in this country is very small. And so we need our institutions and our laws and our authorities to be working in our favor. There is a direct correlation between the economy and the economic factors and agents working properly and crime. A simple thing, as you would say, is take, for example, someone who is on the margins, have no means, and they have to pay these exorbitant interest rates. There's another element of money lending, you know, they're the loan sharks, who they operate not by this. In fact, this is the very opposite of what the loan sharks are. They operate by fear. If you don't pay me, I break your legs.
Yes.
Or I send my son over and we burn on your house. And so,
And they lay wait you.
and they
to
lay wait
retrieve,
you.
yeah.
And so somebody who is in the cusp, in the margins, who owes these people these exorbitant rates, what do you think they do? They come to your house in Kings Park, they come to your house in Vista Del Mar, and they come to your business and they rob you. So you have an interest in every way people are benefiting from this judgment. This judgment is a God gift to us, and we need to take it.
Now, I'm trying to, one of the things that we're looking at here is the fact that people have overextended themselves in terms of credit. It seems to me, and I don't want to, people use the word ignorant, but I don't want to use the word ignorant. We have never been taught to understand how financial systems work. Yes. We, even on the show, try as much as we can with financial analysts and bankers to talk about what interest rates mean, what's the best option, how do you really do the best that you can with what you're making. And I think this is the foundation here, the critical point in this. If I break down something into a weekly payment, it seems more affordable to me when you say I pay $10, $20, $30, than if you tell me how much I'll be paying for the year and how much more I'll be paying than what I borrow. What is your advice? Because if I go through the Money Lenders Act, it's a legal language. And as best as I can use a dictionary along with it, there's certain things I will never understand the true definition of must unless I'm a lawyer, or shall unless I'm a lawyer. But what I'm saying is, even for those who want to educate themselves, it's very difficult because of how the laws are written. What is your recommendation to people who we've never learned this whole concept of interest and borrow and whatnot? When we need money, we get it and we pay how we can. What is your advice to them about when you're going to access credit anywhere? A credible financial institution, or somewhere that is a bit more risky?
Well, we would suggest that whenever you're going to borrow money, make sure you know who you're borrowing from. Mm-hmm. Make sure you find out the name of the company, the name of the bank. Make sure you have copies of every document that you sign, and make sure that you demand that whoever is lending you that money also signs that document. A lot of times, and you're perfectly right, sometimes we speak to persons who have mortgages, and they've said to me they've never seen their mortgage document. They've never read it. They just remember going into the bank and signing. And they got a loan. These are the behaviors that we have to try and stop. We need to start being a person
read the fine print.
Oh yes, read the fine print. Get copies of those documents, because
so once you sign it, get a copy. That's a good principle to start with. Yeah.
Start with that.
Yeah.
Make sure you get a copy, and make sure you know who you're borrowing from. Mm-hmm. We have some situations where persons have contacted us recently regarding money lenders, and they don't even know the name of the pawn shop that loaned them money. When you ask them for a copy of the document that they used when they borrowed the money, they were never given one, or they misplaced it. So it's always important to know who you're borrowing from. Get the documents. Keep copies of all your receipts. Keep copies of all your documents, and read read those receipts. Mm-hmm. Read to make sure that it's the proper person giving you these receipts. We have a case right now where a person said that they were borrowing from one pawn shop, but they were being given receipts from another pawn shop in terms of payment. Mm-hmm. So we're also going through that right now. And it was not until when we start showing them the actual names on the receipts that they recognized what was happening, and that they weren't getting proper receipts from the pawn shop that they had borrowed from. Also, the point of keeping copies of the document helps. Right now we have another situation where a pawn shop had loaned $3,000 to an elderly lady, and she had pawned her house and land. And she is at the moment in court being evicted from her house by that pawn shop. Now, again, one of the difficulties that we saw when I spoke to that person is the fact that she does not have a copy of the documents that she signed. She does not have a copy of the transfer forms where she signed over her house. She does not have a copy of the agreement that she signed with the pawn shop. If you were prudent, if that person were prudent and kept copies of this, it would make it a lot easier for them to seek redress and benefit from seeking assistance from an attorney.
And if I could add to that, my advice in addition to that would be that have some, if you can, because we're speaking in ideals. Most people are desperate. It's an emergency. They need it now. But when you're sourcing a loan, think worst case scenario. Think what happens if I can't make the payment in 1 month. Most people have this very optimistic view. Belizeans, we're very optimistic. We're beautiful people. We're very optimistic. We think that the
We'll
ideal
pray
will
and it'll
happen.
come.
Yeah. So when we borrow and it's 25%
Yeah.
per day, we don't care because don't worry, next week my
I'll
aunt
get
will
the
send
money,
some money from
yeah.
the States and I'll pay off the whole thing. Expect that the worst will happen. And so I think that that is the first thing. The other thing is there are ways and means if you're a little bit patient and if you have the time, because I won't be judgmental and say you always have the time, but there are ways to finance these monies at better rates. For example, even if you don't qualify for a loan, it's possible that you get somebody to guarantee your loan. And you'd find that you'd have a better environment, a better predicament if you're dealing with one of the formal institutions. These money lenders, these loans were intended to be short-term, small loans. $200, $300, you like bill is out one day, you know, oh shoot, I need it quickly, I get it back. They were not intended for 15,000, 20,000, 100,000. And I'm looking at because it was unregulated, I am looking at the assets involved and the loan amounts involved, the principals. And I'm saying, I don't think these should be money lenders lending any at all. And so you have to know, you have to use the right tool.
Cap in the law.
No.
Okay.
You have to use the right tool for the right job. If you believe that this is a big amount, don't go to a money lender. You know, the joke about all of this is that what they use to take a piece of land that is worth $62,000 was a ticket. You know, like when you're taking your phone to pawn it and they give you a little ticket? That's what they use to take the land, you know. No charge, no formal 5-page agreement that you would see in the banks.
Just one ticket.
A little ticket it's about this big. I have it in my
A
bag.
little stop, yeah.
Yes, maybe about 3 inches wide, with scribblings on it. That's what they used. So people have to know that you do not have to take.
That's a ticket.
That's a ticket right there.
That's exactly the ticket. That's exactly the ticket. You know,
I hope you learn more about your rights today. Yeah, but it is. I appreciate what you're saying in terms of the understanding and questioning aspect, and not being eternally optimistic that the funds will come, because the idea of losing your home or possibly being evicted, which sounds a bit strange itself,
especially for an elderly woman.
Is something that you really want to take into consideration, and at the same time know your rights. That's what you are advocating for. I know you all have to go. You have court to go to, so we have to wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to leave before you say before you leave? Final point.
The only thing I would like to add is that we hope that this message keeps transcending to all the persons through Belize, and that the government agencies responsible for these licenses take heed of this and start checking on each and every one of these pawn shops. I hope that they start enforcing these rules and regulations. And if the pawn shops aren't complying with them, I hope that they take the necessary steps to not grant them further licenses and close them down if necessary. But it must come to an end, and we hope that persons like yourselves and attorneys out there continue to assist those in need and help them bring a stop to what's happening right now.
This is a wonderful opportunity for our country. We're young, and people don't like when we say that because we're in our 30s, but we're still very young. This is an opportunity for us to fix something that affects the bread and butter issue for persons. And I'm calling and asking the institutions to rise, to bring out policies, to flesh out the law, to develop the law, so that there's certainty in the industry, so that there are institutions which are identifiable, so I know exactly if I'm wrong, this is exactly what I do. I am calling on the business community to put pressure on the authorities and themselves to draft proposals as to how to deal with these issues. Commendably, in the last year, the legislature has passed amendments to this act, but it has not dealt with the substance of the issue. It has just dealt with, I guess there will be more, but it only deals with how the licenses are issued. There has to be a lot more done. This is a route that we're looking at, and if we deal with this properly, everybody benefits. This is an opportunity. Let's take it.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. And I know many people value the information that they have heard this morning. So once again, thanks. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, it's to do some science experiments right here in studio. So stay tuned.